The fire spoke louder than any man that evening. Its snapping and cracking cut through the dry dusk air like bone breaking under weight. Clara stood just beyond the glow, where her shadow stretched long across the dirt, thin and crooked like a branch after a storm. She did not move. The smoke drifted around her in soft coils, catching in her hair, clinging to the loose threads of her dress. She could smell her own sweat, the bitter truth of it, like rust and sorrow. Across from her, the men spoke like she wasn't there at all. "She's strong," her father said, voice rough, thick with tobacco and old resentment. "Doesn't complain. Got 5 more mouths to feed." Clara stared at the ground. The dust beneath her bare feet was warm from the fading sun. She focused on that, not on his words, not on the trade. Taza, the Apache chief, stood tall and still like stone. He said nothing. His eyes, deep set beneath a furrowed brow, didn't flinch. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. She already knew what she was in that moment. Not a daughter, not a girl, a transaction. Taza tossed down a bundle of pelts. Horseshoes, a coil of rope. The sound of metal on dirt sealed the deal like thunder after prayer. And still, Clara didn't cry. Tears were for people who believed someone might care if they cried. Her tears had dried up seasons ago, back when her stepmother stopped calling her by name and started calling her that one. Back when the town's children snickered as she passed, calling her crowface, pointing to her nose, sharp and bent from a fall off the barn years ago. She'd asked once if it could be fixed. Her father looked at her and said, "No one's going to marry you anyway." She had believed him, so she stood in silence as her father handed her over like a mule past its prime. Taza didn't speak. He didn't ask her name, didn't demand she mount his horse. He simply handed her a blanket, thick and rough spun, and gestured toward the trail leading east. Then he turned, climbed onto his horse, and rode. Clara followed. She walked behind him through sagebrush and rock, over earth cracked like old skin. The sun pressed down, heavy and gold. The wind came from the south, whispering in a tongue older than English. Clara listened but didn't understand. Not the wind, not her place, not what came next. The blanket scratched her arms as she held it tight. Not for warmth, for weight. It was the only thing she owned now. Her mind circled like a hawk over a kill, repeating the voices of the past. The words that had shaped her. "Don't look at people too long, Clara. It makes them uncomfortable. Pull your hair back so folks don't think you're hiding something. She's not right pretty, but she's obedient." Each step she took into the desert was a step away from that girl, the one who tried to make herself small to be loved. But she didn't know yet who the new girl would be. They stopped at twilight near a stream. Taza dismounted and began to build a fire. Clara watched him from a distance. He moved with quiet purpose, like each gesture had meaning passed down from men before him. She did not expect kindness. She expected orders, or silence sharp as blade. But he simply built the fire, laid wood, struck flint. When the flames caught, he didn't sit close. He didn't reach for her. He didn't even ask if she was hungry. And somehow, that stung more. Clara sat on a flat stone near the edge of the light. The blanket pulled tight around her knees. Her stomach ached, but she said nothing. Hunger was familiar. It kept her company most days. She looked at Taza, his face lit by flame, his expression unreadable. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked. Her voice was dry, cracked, like wind through canyon bones. He did not look at her. He only fed the fire, slowly, as if warmth was something to be earned with patience. The silence stretched long. Clara's fingers dug into the dirt, her nails filled with earth. And still she didn't know what to make of him. This man, this chief, this stranger who had accepted her like one might accept rain, unexpected but not unwelcome. She lay that night under stars so thick they looked like spilled salt. She did not sleep, not well. Her body curled against the earth like a child seeking womb warmth. And in that stillness, a truth rose from her chest like smoke. I was not stolen. I was given away. That thought split her in half. Back home, even her little brothers mocked her. Her stepmother used to yank her by the wrist and hiss, "Walk straight. Stop looking pitiful." Her father, once a man of strong hands and slow temper, had grown bitter after the crops failed, after the debts stacked high. He saw her as another thing to carry, not someone worth carrying. The day he arranged her trade, he hadn't even looked her in the eye. He had simply said, Put on your best dress. And she had obeyed, because no one had ever taught her how to disobey. Now, lying beneath the wide open sky, beside a fire built not for punishment but for heat, she realized something she had never dared to believe. She had not deserved any of it. Not the silence, not the shame, not the giving away. And though she still felt ugly, still felt unwanted, there was a crack forming in the center of that belief. A hairline fracture in the wall she'd built around her own heart. Taza didn't speak that night. He didn't ask her questions, didn't offer comfort. But when the wind grew cold, he rose and added more wood to the fire. Then he stepped away. No words, no explanation, just heat and space. And in that simple act, something ancient stirred inside Clara. Not hope, not yet, but something older than hope. A memory from before she learned to be ashamed. A whisper from the little girl who once ran barefoot through wheat fields and believed she might be loved just for laughing. The fire crackled. The stars watched. And for the first time in many seasons, Clara did not feel like something broken. She felt like a story that hadn't been finished. The desert didn't speak in words, but it spoke. It spoke through the breath of wind across stone, through the hush of cottonwood leaves swaying above dry creek beds, through the low groan of wooden saddles and the crunch of footsteps on red dirt. Clara listened, at first, not because she wanted to, but because there was nothing else to do. Taza rode ahead, always steady. He didn't turn to look back. He didn't ask if she was tired. But he never left her behind. She followed, because something in her feet remembered what it meant to move forward. Even when the heart had forgotten. In town, her walk had been hunched. Careful. The kind of walk you learn when you think the world might laugh if it sees you take up too much space. But out here, space wasn't something to fear. The sky was endless, the land wide open, and her body began to remember it was built for more than shrinking. Each day was the same. And not. The sun came up gold and angry. The heat pressed down like a heavy blanket. The flies circled, the dust clung, but inside her, something stirred, soft, almost scared, like a flame flickering behind a wall that had been cold too long. Taza didn't talk much. He pointed at plants, showed her which ones healed and which ones burned. He taught by doing. When he made fire, he didn't explain flint or spark. He let her watch the way his hands moved. Firm but patient. When she tried and failed, he didn't laugh. He just passed her more bark. One night, he handed her a small pouch, woven from reed and smelling of dry sage. For dreams, he said, put under your head. The words were clumsy in English, but they felt full in her ears. Clara held the pouch like it was something sacred. No one had ever asked her to dream good dreams before. Not even her mother, not before she died. Not after. That night, she slept with the pouch tucked beneath her head. She dreamed of running, not from fear, but toward something. Her legs strong, her breath sure. In the dream, her hair was wild and her arms swung freely. No voices called her back. No hands dragged her down. Only wind and earth and forward. She woke with tears dried on her cheeks. And for once, she didn't hide them. The days moved like beads on a long string, one after another, worn by time but still shining when turned to the light. Clara learned to read the sky, to know when rain would come, if it ever did. She learned the sound of coyotes and the warning cry of hawks. She learned not to fear the howl of wolves at night, because Taza did not fear it, and his silence was a kind of armor. One morning, she caught her own reflection in a pool of water. Not glass smooth, not perfect, but clear enough. The face that stared back was brown from sun, sharp at the cheekbones, smudged with dust. Her hair was tied back with a strip of leather, and there was something in her eyes she hadn't seen in years. Presence. She didn't look beautiful, but she looked alive. Later that day, she stumbled on a loose rock while crossing a stream. Her ankle twisted, and she pitched forward, arms flailing. Taza turned just in time to catch her by the elbow, pulling her upright with a swift, strong tug. His hand on her arm was warm. She expected to be scolded, or ignored. Instead, he looked at her, not with pity, not with annoyance, just saw her. You stand, he said simply. She nodded, breathless, swallowed hard. But later, when they stopped to camp, he turned to her and said again, you are not weak. 3 words, no more. But they struck deeper than any sermon she'd heard back in the church with the cracked windows. That night, she sat beside the fire and ran her fingers over her legs. The cuts healing, the bruises fading. She touched her arms, stronger now. There was a steadiness in her hands when she reached for wood. A surety in her step when she gathered water. She wasn't who she used to be. And she didn't want to be. Once, she had prayed to be smaller, prettier, more likable, to be the kind of girl who was chosen. Now, she didn't want to be chosen. She wanted to choose. The next day, Taza showed her how to skin a rabbit. His fingers moved with grace, as if honoring the life taken. Clara mimicked his movements. Her hands were unsure at first, but he watched without judgment. When she finished, he nodded once. "You learn fast." "I want to," she said. He looked at her, not surprised, as if he had always known that inside her lived someone waiting to rise. They came upon a grove later that evening. Wildflowers grew where water had once carved the earth. The sky turned violet above them, the clouds soft as breath. Clara walked ahead of him without realizing. Her steps sure, her back straight. The wind brushed her cheek and she let herself smile. Just a little. She didn't belong to anyone. Not to her father, not to the town, not even to Taza. And that was the miracle of it. Taza never tried to hold her. He walked beside her. That night, she laughed for the first time in months. She had slipped in a bed of pine needles, landing hard on her backside. Leaves stuck in her braid. When she looked up, Taza stood nearby, a rare half-smile tugging at his mouth. Something in the absurdity of it. The girl who'd been traded like a mule now laughing under the stars, burst out of her. A real, full sound, and to her surprise, he chuckled too. Quiet, but true. The firelight danced across their faces. And in that moment, something between them shifted. Not like a door opening. More like two rivers meeting in silence, each carrying what the other had never known. They found the wagon at first light. Broken wheels leaned against dry stone. One horse lay twisted in the dust, its eyes wide and empty. The other shivered on its feet, flanks torn and foam streaking its mouth. Blood had dried in jagged trails along the wood. Taza said nothing. He dismounted slow, calm as dusk. Clara stayed back, her body tight with the scent of something wrong. Then they saw her, a woman, curled in the shade of the wreck, her yellow hair tangled, dress ripped at the shoulder. A rifle gripped in her lap like it was the last thing she had. Her lips moved, whispering to ghosts, eyes wide and wet, but hollow. Taza stepped forward, slow. Open hands, no blade in sight. She screamed, "Don't touch me, stay away, you savage." The sound sliced through the morning like a hawk's cry. Taza stopped, still as stone. Clara watched, her chest burning. The woman collapsed into herself, sobbing. Clara moved then. She stepped between them, palms raised, her voice gentle. "He's not going to hurt you," she said. "He's not that kind of man." The woman looked up, her eyes met Clara's, and something changed. "You're with him?" she spat. Her words hit harder than the scream. As if Clara had just grown another face. As if all the walking, all the learning, all the healing she had fought for meant nothing. One look, and this woman saw her as less than white, less than safe, less than human. Still, they helped her. Taza bound her wounds with skill and silence. Clara calmed the remaining horse, her hands sure even as her heart trembled. That night, they sat beneath a low sky. The fire cracked gently, the flames rising like breath. Ruth, she said her name was Ruth, lay wrapped in blankets, eyes fluttering as sleep took her. Clara sat apart. The wind moved through the trees, brushing her cheek like a mother who never came. Her hands were clenched, her jaw tight. The shame had returned, not the old kind, born of crooked noses and town gossip. This was newer, hotter. It came from watching a man she respected kneel before someone who would rather see him in chains than in kindness. "Why didn't you leave her?" Clara asked. Taza looked toward the fire, the light dancing in his eyes. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "She was alone," he said. "You remember what that feels like?" Clara turned away. Yes, she remembered. Being alone didn't always mean being without people. Sometimes it meant being surrounded and still unseen. She had felt it in her father's house, in church pews, in crowded streets, alone like a bird caged in plain sight. But this was worse, because now she knew what it meant to be with someone who saw her, who heard her without needing sound. And still, the world called him monster. Still, they would rather see her as lost than see her beside him. They walked toward the army outpost the next day. Ruth insisted it was nearby. Clara followed, but her heart was heavy as the sun. With each mile, she felt the weight of every judgment waiting in the white tents ahead. When the outpost came into view, wooden fences, canvas flapping in wind, blue-coated men moving like insects, Clara slowed. Ruth was welcomed instantly. Soldiers rushed forward. Hands lifted her gently. Voices offered water, blankets, safety. Then they saw Taza. Their faces changed. One barked. Step back. Apache. Another grabbed Clara's arm, firm and cold. Don't worry, miss. We'll get you home. We'll deal with him. Taza didn't fight, didn't speak, but his silence was different now. Not peace. Something deeper, like the land itself had been insulted. They don't understand, Clara whispered, but her words vanished under the sound of rope binding wrists. The stomp of boots dragging him toward a holding tent. Clara stood frozen. She had walked all this way, bled, healed, laughed under stars, and yet here she was, reduced again to someone rescued. Not seen, not believed. The one man who had never hurt her was now caged. And no one listened. That night, she stormed into the captain's tent. Dust on her boots, fury in her breath. Why is he being held? She demanded. The captain, gray-eyed and grease-skinned, didn't even look up. Because he's Apache, he said. That's reason enough out here. Clara slammed her fist on the table. The tin cup jumped. He saved her. He saved me. The man sighed, leaning back like he had heard this all before. He scares the womenfolk. Can't have that. Now can we? That's when something broke inside her. Not a snap. A shift. Like ice melting. Like rope burning through. She turned and walked out before the rage took her further. Outside, Ruth sat near a fire. Wrapped in comfort. Eyes avoiding the truth. Say something, Clara pleaded. Ruth looked away. It's better this way, she said. You'll be safe now. Clara stared at her. I was never the one in danger. She whispered. The moon was high when she returned to the holding tent. The guards were half asleep. Shadows stretched long across the ground. Taza knelt, his wrists bound, his face bruised but proud. I'm sorry, Clara said. I brought you here. He shook his head slowly. You needed to see. And she did. She saw it all. Saw how justice changed faces depending on who wore the uniform. Saw how mercy could be silenced beneath fear. Saw that even freedom must sometimes be stolen back. She pressed her forehead to his. Tears falling like rain finally come. I won't let them keep you. He exhaled, long and low, like someone who had been holding his breath for years. And in that breath, Clara made her decision. Not just to run, but to rise. The night held its breath. Crickets quieted. Wind bent low to listen. Clara moved like shadow, soft. Sure, wrapped in dust and the silence of her own awakening. The outpost slept beneath a sky full of watching stars. Fires smoldered low. Guards dozed with rifles resting in lazy hands. The same hands that had struck Taza. The same mouths that called him savage. Clara moved anyway. She found the supply shed by feel, by memory. Inside, rusted tools, ropes coiled like sleeping snakes. A pair of bolt cutters hanging from a crooked nail. They were heavier than she expected. Cold in her hands, but familiar in their purpose. She wasn't afraid. Not now. When she stepped into the holding tent, Taza looked up. His eyes found hers like they always had, not with question. Not with surprise, but with understanding. He was kneeling, wrists bound behind his back. Bruises bloomed along his jaw. She knelt in front of him, tools hidden beneath her shawl. If we run, he murmured, they will follow. Clara shook her head. Then let them, she said, voice steady. Let them see what strength really is. The chains gave way with a sharp snap. Not loud enough to wake the dead, but maybe enough to wake the part of herself that once thought freedom had to be granted. She rose first. He followed. They moved through the trees. Their footsteps quiet, like they belonged there, because they did. The earth welcomed them, soft soil beneath. Branches parting above, the scent of pine wrapped around them like blessing. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. By dawn, they reached the canyon. It opened wide before them. Stone carved by wind and time. Taza led her to a place he called the nest, a hollow in the cliffs where hawks once raised their young. Clara collapsed to her knees. The weight of what she'd done catching up with her. They'll call me a traitor, she said. Taza crouched beside her, brushed hair from her face. Slow and reverent, Only those afraid of truth use that word. They rested 3 nights in the stone nest. The sun warmed the rock by day. The wind whispered lullabies at night. They drank from a spring tucked beneath roots. Ate what Taza could catch. Clara's hands, now used to carving, cleaning, gathering, worked without hesitation. She didn't feel stolen. She felt claimed, but not owned. Accepted, not used. On the 4th morning, they followed the stream east until they reached a clearing. There, an old woman sat beside a cooking fire. Her hair was silver, her face dark and folded like the land. Taza greeted her with a low bow. "My aunt," he said. "She was once shaman to our people." The woman's eyes met Clara's. Deep, unflinching. "You were not given," she said in English. "You were found." Clara knelt at her feet without knowing why. Not from shame, but because something inside her recognized the truth in the elder's words. They stayed, not in hiding, in healing. Days passed, seasons turned, the creek rose and fell. They planted corn along the water's edge, learned the rhythm of birdsong and the weight of weather. Clara no longer measured her days by how others saw her. She measured them in firewood, in laughter, in how often she caught Taza watching her as she worked, with quiet eyes. Soft mouth, full heart. They never spoke vows. They didn't need to. They shared fire, shared food, shared silence that didn't demand, didn't press. That kind of love didn't need witness. Clara touched his face sometimes. And it was like praying, like speaking to the sky with her palms. She no longer flinched from her reflection. Her arms were strong now. Her skin sun-darkened, her hair wild and knotted and full of smoke, and she loved it. Not because it was beautiful to others, but because it was hers. She belonged to no one but the land. And the man who walked beside her, not in front, not behind, but peace, like river mist, never stays long in open air. One morning, Clara saw dust rising on the horizon. Riders. 5. She ran to the fire. Breath short. "They've found us," she said. "Soldiers. And Ruth is with them." Taza didn't flinch, just stood, his face quiet, like he had always known this would come. "Go to the canyon," he said. "You and my aunt." But Clara grabbed his arm. "No," she said. "If they take you again, they'll take me too. I won't be silent. You should not die for me," he said, voice soft. "I'm not dying," she answered. "I'm living for what you taught me." The riders came as the sun struck the clearing. Guns raised, faces tight. Ruth sat high on her horse, her arms still in a sling, her eyes shadowed. The captain shouted, "Let the girl go." Clara stepped forward. "No weapon, no fear. He's not your prisoner," she said. "He's my husband." It wasn't a lie. It wasn't a ceremony. It was truth spoken into earth and sky. Taza stepped beside her, his silence louder than any threat. The two of them stood not as fugitives, but as people who had chosen each other. "You don't get to decide who I belong to," Clara said, voice thick. "Not my father. Not this uniform. He gave me away. But Taza gave me back to myself." A younger soldier in the back shifted. His eyes softened. He lowered his rifle. "Sir," he murmured, "they're not doing anything wrong." The captain cursed, spat, but turned his horse. The others followed. Clara stood until the dust settled. Then she turned to Taza, took his hand, and smiled. Not because everything was easy now, but because everything was earned. Blank. Blank. They stayed in that place. Grew roots where fear had once tried to rot them. Clara planted herbs beside the corn, wove nets, learned to read clouds, to track elk, to listen. The land accepted her, because she no longer asked it to. She just showed up, real and unhidden. Sometimes travelers came, cousins, traders, even a priest once, but no one asked questions. They looked at her and saw a woman shaped by the wild. By choice, by fire. When word came that her father had died, alone, bitter, unwept, she didn't feel joy. She felt release. She went to the stream, planted wildflowers, not for him, but for the girl she had been. The girl no one could keep. The girl who learned to choose love like a path through trees, not a cage to rest in. And one night, beneath a sky full of stars that blinked like old eyes, Taza wrapped her in the same blanket he'd once handed her in silence. And whispered, "No one will ever give you away again." She leaned into him, closed her eyes, and let the fire warm her bones. Not because she was saved, but because she was home.